So let's talk about this, because I think one of the things people don't realize, and what victimizes them very often, is that they think they know how to identify abusers. And I'm not saying that they don't, but very often people who come out of things like high control religions, whether mainstream or fringe, when they come out of high control families, high control churches, high control religions, and they move into these like more loosey-goosey, spiritual but not religious, like pagan, heathen, new age, all of those kinds of fields. When they move into those spaces, they think, okay, the abusers I know how to identify were in this context of high control, very, very rigid hierarchy, very much like I know what those kinds of abusers look like. And they're not used to the narrative of the abusers that exist in this new space for them. And that makes them easy prey, one, because they've already been indoctrinated into a high control religion, which means that their brain and neurological systems are primed to be all or nothing thinkers. They've already been primed that way. So very often, if they can be hooked in and feel like they're safe and welcome and warm now again, that they've been brought out of the rain of this scary world because they just got out of a high control religion, that they can be helped along their way, they can fall straight into a cult, a religion, a toxic relationship, etc. Right? How does that play out? Well, you end up with abusers who say the right things. They say, we don't have any leaders here. We don't have any hierarchy here. They blame the wrong thing, because it's not hierarchy that causes these people who are abusers in the institutions to abuse. So they say, we don't have hierarchy here. We don't do all of that organized stuff where they have all of these regulations and policies about what you can and can't do. We're open here. But there's a caveat. Underneath this lack of regulation means that it is the interpersonal skills and whims of the people who are more socially dominant, more Machiavellian, that then control the entire environment. And as such, the people who found these groups, who lead these groups, and who control the environment are the ones who ultimately determine what's going on, even if they're not a leader. We're all leaders here. Of course, I don't think I'm more important than anyone else, but I want to ask you about your involvement with, right? So they can deflect in this sort of, I'm not as important. They become more communal narcissists in the sense that they are saying the right stuff for the community, but they are still leveraging in a Machiavellian way very often their positioning over you, that you're not as enlightened, that you're not as healed, that you're not as good, that you're not as whatever as they are and other people are. And that comparison and that feeling of like, I just wanted to belong somewhere can keep that person on that leash into a very, very toxic situation, especially because the people who are used to very bombastic, I am your leader kind of toxicity aren't necessarily going to identify it immediately in somebody who is more communal or covert. And that's something we have to be aware of. And I keep seeing this again and again and again and again with all of these like deconstructionist groups, deconstructionist churches. We're the next best thing. We're the cool church. We're the cool progressive people. We're the ones who are going to help you now that you've left Christianity. Here's the group that's going to help you. Oh, you've just come in out of the cold from whatever high control religion. We're going to bring you in. You're one of us. Especially this like, you are our spiritual family narratives are so fucking toxic. Your soul chose us. All of that kind of very, very surface level, but sounds deep and profound. You're one of us. Your spirit chose this, blah, 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 blah. Yes, this is exactly the life you're supposed to have. And we're here to give you the right answers now. It's the right place. That love bombing, that warmth, you've come out of the cold now narratives. It's the exact same thing that the churches do, but it has enough of a different flavor with these spiritual but not religious communities that very often it is so easy for abusers, for that dark triad people to take advantage of folks who have already been traumatized, who are moving into those spaces. And that is similar in some ways to people who are raised in these spaces now, because a couple generations may have been spiritual but not religious or pagan and stuff like that, where they can actually be conned into these different kinds of churches or different kinds of high control spaces because they're so used to looking at what abuse looks like in their own environments, but don't see it in necessarily other ones outside of their own context. It's not so unusual, and when you have any kind of toxicity or gaslighting or abuse or trauma, it's really easy to fall into that I just want to belong, and when people provide that for you, suddenly it feels good and warm and cuddly until the shoe drops and you end up realizing that they've pulled you along this journey into radicalization somewhere, and now what you thought was a dream has now turned into a nightmare. The biggest thing I want people to understand, honestly, is the fact that there are abusers in all environments, all labels, and if you're used to more overt kind of abuse, look up covert and communal abuse. If you are used to covert and communal kind of abuse, make sure you're understanding overt and kind of bombastic style abuse. Look at the ways in which this plays out, because they all have the same handbook ultimately, but how they show up immediately to you and whether you can identify that very often depends on your exposure to these kinds of people and these kinds of tactics. And that's one of the biggest things, is understanding and healing your own trauma can help you make sure that these people are not able to get their claws into you, or that you can identify that weird feeling as anxiety and not as butterflies, right? So that's just my 2 cents on this, because it's something I keep seeing again and again and again, and I've seen so many times on so many different aspects of different communities being built up around hashtags and identities and labels, especially in the past 4 years on TikTok.